So a few months ago, I had the idea to make a comparative analysis between two of my favorite short stories of all time, The Lottery and The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. I wanted to make a video about how they both tackle themes of one person being harmed for the benefit of everyone else, and I didn't end up making that video. And now I'm using that same idea to talk about Candle Cove and Squidward's suicide. If any of my old English teachers are watching this, I'm sorry, I failed you. Now it's been years since I've read Squidward's suicide, but I'm pretty sure that it isn't a great story. I mean, the title alone is already kind of ridiculous. Like, obviously self-harm and taking your own life is a very serious thing, but I was talking to my wife last night about this story, and the idea is just way too funny to me, like the concept of it all. And I know the idea is that an episode of SpongeBob having something so messed up in it is supposed to be jarring in a kind of scary way, but it overshoots that and just ends up feeling so silly to me. So I do kind of have those preconceived notions inside my head, but I am open to be proven wrong about this story, and maybe it's actually really good. Like always with these videos, I'm not trying to make fun of the original authors of these things. I think it's really cool they wrote stories that are now like read and loved by a lot of people. That's really impressive. And I'm sure that none of these authors thought that someday a 26-year-old man would sit in his home office and critique them thoroughly. As for Candle Cove, I read that one again a couple months ago for my Creepypasta iceberg, and I remember it holding up really well, although I still have some minor gripes with it I'll get into later. So the idea for this video is that I'll be going through both of these stories in great detail like I've done with my other Creepypasta videos. I'll be doing Squidward's suicide first, and then going through Candle Cove, and then doing a kind of comparative analysis between the two at the end. I do have to give a really big disclaimer that we're going to be talking about suicide and violence and dead children in particular. I completely forgot how graphic the Squidward suicide story was, so be warned, it's definitely kind of excessive in my opinion. So if any of that would make you uncomfortable, then please go watch another one of my videos. I know not everybody likes reading really kind of disturbing and messed up things. I'm just kind of a weird dude who likes that kind of stuff. But I'm excited for this video. I think it'll be really interesting to look at two stories that I already have some preconceived notions about and see just how well they hold up in my mind. Also, I started a Let's Play channel with my friend Zach called Zada Plays, and we'd both really appreciate if you guys would subscribe to that channel as well. It's a super chill Let's Play channel where we're both playing through Cassette Beast and then talking about what we love about that game and just other random topics we think about. There's an episode up on the channel right now that we recorded last week, and we're hoping to be posting a couple episodes there every week. I know it's very different than what I do here, but we both love playing games together, so if you want to follow along in your own game and listen to two friends talk about gaming, then I think that could be pretty cool. I'll link that in the description of this video. We'd love to hit 100 subs on that channel in the first month or two of posting there. Thank you guys all so much for watching. But enough intro, let's get into my comparative hyper-realistic analysis of two Lost Media creepypastas. We're going to start with Squidward's suicide. By the way, I truly have no idea if YouTube is going to like nuke this video or not because I keep using that word suicide, but I don't like censoring words like that. I feel like it just makes it almost seem more disrespectful. So wish me luck that YouTube won't destroy my channel because I refuse to use the words sewer slide in any of these videos. Now, I touched on this earlier, but I think giving your story this particular title means that you're already starting out having to fight an uphill battle. I'm sure there are lots of people out there that think that tackling a subject as extreme as this in a children's cartoon is super jarring and eerie, but I'm not one of those people. Plus, SpongeBob already tackles grown-up themes like identity theft and creating a buddy man out of bubbles that everybody hates. The idea behind a lot of these lost episode creepypastas is that this was something that was either aired once that wasn't supposed to be, or was never aired and kind of found later. But the idea that a single disgruntled animator would go through the entire process of creating a creepy episode of SpongeBob for no real reason is kind of hard to imagine. Granted, there will be an explanation kind of as to how this got made that we'll talk about later at the end of the story. I also think it's extra funny that Squidward is the character we're focusing on here, because it feels like the author wanted to include a character taking their own life to be edgy. So when they were thinking about what character would be the most likely to do that in the SpongeBob universe, I'm sure they went right to Squidward, whose life is abject misery for the most part. But I'd love to see an alternate universe where the author chose like Larry the Lobster for the story instead of Squidward. That would be wild. But enough talking about the concept of the story, let's get into the actual story itself. I just want to start off by saying that if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There isn't one. This is maybe one of the most bold beginnings to a story that I've ever seen in my entire life. They literally start off with prepare to be disappointed. That's insane. Someone should try using that as like a pickup line or something. Just tell the person prepare to be disappointed so you can set the bar as low as possible and then beat those expectations. This intro is just a play on the whole I have no idea how or why this happened trope that can actually be done really well in the right context. And this might be kind of a hot take, but Annihilation is one of my favorite movies, and I think it plays with this trope really well in a way that leaves you with more questions than answers. I think ambiguity can be a very strong component to horror, and that's what makes something like Petscop so terrifying to me. So let's see how the story uses this particular setup. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't, but it did have a perk beyond education. Honestly, unpaid internships are a thing of nightmares, so the story is already terrifying. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would go crazy over it. Since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view new episodes days before they aired. I honestly would have gone crazy for this too if it wasn't 2005, because in my opinion, it's really only the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob that are any good. But those first 3 seasons are like insanely good. My wife and I watch them and rewatch them all the time. It's such a genius show in my opinion. This all reminds me of one time when I was in college and someone insulted someone else by saying, "You look like you weren't allowed to watch SpongeBob as a kid." And I don't know what it was about that particular insult, but I was absolutely dying. Did anyone's parents forbid them from watching SpongeBob when they were younger? Let me know in the comments below. I'll get right to it without giving too many unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie. The entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. This is honestly such a real feeling. Whenever I make a longer video, it takes so much more time and effort to make the next video, even if the next video isn't that long. It is kind of funny to imagine the Nickelodeon executives just being completely okay with the fact that their creatives are just like delaying the start to a season because they're burnt out. Because I don't know if you guys know this about most executives for any company, especially creative companies, they don't care about that stuff. They just want to make as much money as possible, so they will work you to the bone and burn you out as much as they possibly can. But I will say that in these first couple paragraphs, the story is already better than I expected from what I first thought when I read the title. I think that having this set up as an unaired episode that an insider saw once is actually a very clever idea and really adds to the urban legend element of the story. I do love it when internet stories present themselves as true, and I think this one is written in a way that would have definitely convinced me of its authenticity when I was younger. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back several months. Me and 2 other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut of an episode. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. I personally can barely remember this episode. I really don't know much about the show past season 3, other than the fact that it leaned into a lot more like gross out humor. Like there's this gross episode where Mr. Krabs loses his shell and he becomes this like fleshy weird crab thing for the episode, and the less we speak about that Splinter episode, the better. Now given the final cut isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card at the beginning. It's sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles being used, such as How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Bivalve, in which SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, just work-related chuckles. Can we please make the term work-related chuckles a thing? It's the perfect way to describe when a coworker makes a joke that isn't really that funny, but you have to kind of give them a pity laugh to at least acknowledge what they said. And if you can't tell by the caliber of jokes that I usually make on this channel, I was probably the recipient of many work-related chuckles from coworkers that pitied me. Also, How Sex Doesn't Work is like the perfect example of a non-joke that is kind of funny, but mostly just because you're at work and the bar is on the floor. I wonder if the person that wrote that joke thought that they were going to absolutely kill with it, only for it to fall flat. Our narrator literally describes it as not particularly funny. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the other interns did a small throat laugh at it. I'm glad this story is at least acknowledging that the concept of that particular title is kind of funny. Again, the subject matter isn't funny, it's just the jarring juxtaposition of it all. The episode started with the happy-go-lucky music playing as normal. Hey author of Sonic.exe, take notes on how this person describes the music as happy-go-lucky and doesn't just give us the name of some obscure video game song no one knows. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside. Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down, as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy and Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things began to seem off. It would actually be so hilarious to write an episode of SpongeBob that starts with Squidward saying he needs to practice for a concert and then immediately cutting to the end of that concert. One could argue that you don't really need the first scene of Squidward establishing the concert and it could open right up with the concert ending, but my guess is that there are more pressing issues with this episode. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. It is supposed to be synced with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when Squidward stops playing, the sound finishes, as if the skip never happened. Maybe I'm not as smart of a gamer as I previously thought, but I'm having such a hard time picturing what just happened. Am I the only one? Is it just saying that there are reused visual frames to extend the scene to the endpoint of the audio track? That's what I'm thinking, but I could be wrong. Let me know what I'm missing here. I can't picture it for some reason. There is a slight murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not the normal cartoon booing that is common in the show, mind you. You could clearly hear malice in it. Okay, the story is starting to lose me just a little bit. Like I said before, it's mostly an issue because my mind is picturing SpongeBob when I'm supposed to be creeped out. Like, imagining this crowd of cartoon fish hitting Squidward with the hyper-realistic booing is just so funny to me. You can actually hear their hatred for Squidward in their booing. Also, I feel like Squidward is so jaded and delusional about his clarinet skills that he wouldn't even be bothered by this. He spends like all of his time hating everyone in Bikini Bottom. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame. He too is booing, which is very much unlike him. Well, thanks for letting us know. I'm glad that SpongeBob doesn't spend all of his time off the clock heckling local musicians at their concerts. That isn't the oddest thing, though. What is odd is that everyone has hyper-realistic eyes, all very detailed. Here we go again with the hyper-realistic craze that haunted creepypastas for so many years. What is interesting is that something being hyper-realistic is actually not that out of place in a SpongeBob episode. They often do those insert shots with like overly detailed matte paintings of characters, and they are hilarious every single time they show up, so this is actually a decent use of that trope. I actually think this was one of the first, if not the first creepypasta to use this description, so it's not the fault of the author that hyper-realistic became a meme later on. But again, I don't think this is honestly that creepy. It's not even particularly out of place for a SpongeBob episode, so I think that lessens the overall impact. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. The red eyes thing feels like such a cliche as well. Plus, as an absolute nerd, I just associate that phrase with the Yu-Gi-Oh card Red Eyes Black Dragon. And that just might be the nerdiest reference I've ever made in one of these videos. I can literally feel my virginity returning to me as we speak. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, but since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children yet. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm pretty sure the writers aren't clued into some secret obsession with mockery and scary eyes that kids have. It's safe to say this is a mistake. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. Good use of the word forlorn here. It really accentuates the horrible state that Squidward is in. The view out of his porthole window is of a night sky, so it isn't very long after the concert. The unsettling part is that at this point, there's no sound, literally zero sound. Not even from feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their statuses showed them working perfectly. Okay, not gonna lie, you're losing me here again. I'm on board with like a rogue animator making a spooky episode of SpongeBob, but introducing this like slightly paranormal aspect seems like it's going a little too far to me, which honestly is a little hypocritical of me because at the beginning of this episode I did say that a rogue animator like animating this whole thing seemed unrealistic. And I'm not opposed to paranormal horror at all. In fact, I love paranormal horror, but I feel like this story did a really good job of establishing itself as real up to this point. And maybe this is just something that no one else cares about but me, but I really like when urban legends have like rational explanations to them because to me, it makes them even scarier. Because if this was just a tape that was made by a crazy animator, then I think that could be legitimately freaky. It's unnerving that someone would go through the effort of making this weird, creepy episode. But the episode having the power to, I guess, suck the sound out of a room is a bridge too far for me. Again, it's just a personal preference of mine, so it's not like an objective statement or anything. Squidward just sits there in silence, blinking for about 30 seconds, then starts to sob softly. He puts his hands, tentacles, over his eyes and cries quietly for a full minute more. I absolutely love that the author was writing this scary story and wanted Squidward covering his eyes, but had to deal with the fact that Squidward has tentacles. There's really no winning in this situation because if you clarify that he used his tentacles like the author did, then it's just going to end up being funny, but you have to make that distinction or else it's just factually incorrect. I mean, one could argue that making a scary story based on a lost episode of SpongeBob was a fool's errand to begin with, but we're well past that point. I would have loved if, like, just like the actual SpongeBob Lost episode, Patchy the Pirate introduced it with a live action segment at the beginning of this episode. He could be like, "Arr, today we're watching the Lost episode about our good friend Squidward playing a clarinet concert." And then you could just cut after this horrifying episode to Patchy staring at the screen in utter disbelief. That would actually be kind of hilarious. All the while, a sound in the background is very gradually growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounds like a slight breeze through the forest. Okay, this is an unscripted segment of this video, but I don't understand the obsession of like this weird slight breeze sound that's going to show up all throughout this like spooky episode. Like later it's supposed to have like screams mixed in with it, which I guess is kind of creepy, but it just seems like a weird detail to focus so much on right now. I'm also kind of wondering why the people in the edit room aren't commenting on this or skipping until they find something interesting. They have to know that something's wrong at this point. That's something that I think works against this story. It's hard to believe this was a real experience when there are so many people watching this spooky videotape. I know that if me and my friends or coworkers found something like this, we'd be talking about it the entire time we were watching it, especially if there were extended silences in it. As you add more characters to a horror story, you have to decide to what level each character will believe the horror in front of them and how they will respond to it. It can be easy to forgive a single poor decision made by a character that is experiencing something horrific on their own. It's harder to excuse poor decisions made by a group. And I don't think any of these editors have made any poor decisions yet. It's just an odd detail that there are so many of them, but none of them have really said anything about this strange, spooky episode. It's just something to keep in mind if you're writing a story that deals with a lot of characters in a scary situation. You have to account for the fact that as a group, you'll probably make better decisions or have more rational thoughts than just like one person on their own. The screen slowly begins to zoom in on his face. By slowly, I mean that it's only noticeable if you look at the shots 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen then twitches a bit, as if it twists on itself for a split second, before going back to normal. I think that describing someone getting more and more upset and sad can actually be pretty heartbreaking and like kind of scary in a way, but not when that person is actually Squidward tentacles. Now, I'm not saying that Squiddy deserves it, he doesn't, but I'm going to have a hard time feeling bad when it's a fictional TV character in a bootleg cartoon. The wind through the trees sound gets louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is that this sound, and Squidward's sobbing, sounded real. It was like it wasn't coming from the speakers, but that the speakers themselves were holes that the sound was traveling through from the other side. As good as a sound as the studio likes to have, they don't have the equipment to be able to produce audio of that quality. The Squidward is coming from inside the house. Honestly, as someone who is very particular about the way that I listen to music and the speakers and headphones that I use, I could low-key use some of this cursed weeping Squidward technology in my life. Below the sound of wind and sobbing, very faintly audible, something that sounded like laughing. Now, I don't know what the author's intent was here, but when you mention the word laughing in a SpongeBob SquarePants episode, I'm just going to think about the SpongeBob laugh. And you can distort that laugh all you want, but I'm not going to think it's scary. Again, the author could be thinking about a different laugh that is actually creepy, but the sound of SpongeBob laughing as Squidward looks forlorn on his bed while he's weeping is just funny to me. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second. You had a hard time pinning it. We watched the episode twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had time to think about them. Not to nitpick, I guess yes to nitpick, but in the beginning of the story, the narrator said that he was going to be direct and skip unnecessary details, but now he's being pretty darn specific. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over it, as if a single frame was replaced. I can't tell what the author means by the screen twitched violently. Maybe they just meant to say glitched, or maybe it's a term that I'm not familiar with, but I think I know what the author means. I'm also pretty dang sure this author is from Europe because they use the term series 4 instead of season 4 like American people do when we're talking about TV shows. So if twitched is a term that you guys use over in Europe, then let me know. I'm just an ignorant yank, I guess. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. Okay, I know that I said the story was losing me before, but I'm officially lost now. I am not someone that thinks that you can't write a story that deals with bad things happening to children. I'm one of those freaks that actually likes Skinamarink. But ideally, that horror should be earned from the viewer. It's just so cheap and lazy to throw in a graphic depiction of a dead child in a story that has done nothing to scare me up to this point. It feels like the author realized they haven't written anything even remotely unsettling, so they decided to go for some cheap shock value here. Again, I actually really enjoy some depraved and disturbing media, but I really only enjoy it when it feels earned or impactful, and this story hasn't earned any of that from me yet. So if you're someone who wants to write a story that is super messed up and deals with something like child death, know that there is a way to do it effectively that doesn't feel exploitative. I mean, Dr. Sleep has a scene in it where a kid is killed by a group of adults and it's horrifying, but it manages to pull it off without feeling gratuitous, which is honestly really impressive to me. Again, content warning for me talking about graphic depictions of dead children. There's going to be a couple instances of that going forward. This is your last warning. He couldn't have been more than 6. His face was mangled and bloodied, one eye dangling over it popped. He was naked down to his underwear, his stomach cruelly cut open and his entrails splayed out beside him. He was laying on some pavement that was probably a road. I don't think this detailed description was all that necessary. I think it would have been more impactful if we could have just imagined that. But also, again, I could just be extra sensitive about this since I'm sure YouTube will absolutely nuke this video now. But it just feels so undeserved and comes out of nowhere in the story. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer but no crime tape, evidence tags, or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. These creepypastas are making me absolutely hate the term the most upsetting part or the scariest part, because they never follow that up with the actual most upsetting part. In Sonic.exe, our main character is far more concerned with the fictional character of Miles Tails Prower than his actual real-life best friend Kyle. And Jeff the Killer's parents are more upset about the thing of bleach than they are about Jeff being horribly mangled. Also, this is a tangent, but why is Tails' name Miles Tails Prower? Why is it so formal? Isn't Sonic's name literally just Sonic the Hedgehog? That's besides the point though. Anyways, no, Nickelodeon intern, the most upsetting part of this image isn't the shadow of a man or the fact that it isn't shot at an angle that would be used for evidence. It's the graphic depiction of a dead child. This is like getting into a car crash that leaves you mangled and your car completely totaled and being like, the most upsetting part was that I saw the check engine light come on right before the crash. I get that horror is subjective, but I'm going to say that everyone should be more disturbed by a photo of an actual dead child than the shadow of some random guy. But also, any horror that the story is trying to create will be immediately voided when I have to read the word Squidward again. It would seem they were the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified but pressed on, hoping that this was just a sick joke. The story's actually been really good about grammar so far, but holy commas, Batmat. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, half of his body in the frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. What is with these old creepypastas and having things running from people's eyes? We saw the same thing with Eyeless Jack. Although I guess by virtue of having no eyes, Eyeless Jack can't have something dripping from his eyes, but you guys know what I mean. Ironically, if you had blood dripping from your own eyes, it would be absolutely terrifying. It's just less so when it's Squidward tent poles. The blood was also done in a hyper-realistic style, looking as if you'd get it on your fingers if you touched the screen. Our narrator is talking like he's reading an ad for 3D television. Remember when those were supposed to be a thing? The wind now sounded as if it was that of a gale blowing through the forest. There were even snapping sounds, like of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasted for longer intervals and came more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single frame photo. I do have to give this author credits. I said that I could only picture the SpongeBob laughing, but it does mention that the laughing is a deep baritone laugh, but now I'm just imagining like SpongeBob's voice pitched down like it's Five Nights at Freddy's. Also, a single frame photo, let me guess, it's going to be another graphic depiction of a dead child. How original. The editor was reluctant to go back. We all were, but we knew he had to. The good news is that he actually doesn't have to. In fact, you can all just leave the edit bay right now and call the police and report whoever turned this tape into you guys. There can't be that many people working on an episode of SpongeBob, and even fewer that have the authority to turn in a final cut, so it feels like finding this person should be easy. And again, I know there's a paranormal aspect to it, but the people in this story don't know that yet. And maybe I'm just biased by my own perspective, where if I saw anything remotely as scary as this, I would be turning it off immediately and reporting it to somebody. That's what's kind of hard about lost media creepypastas. You have to make it believable that the protagonist would continue watching, even if most people wouldn't. Sonic.exe did this masterfully by rightfully pointing out that everyone on the planet is a big Sonic the Hedgehog fan, but that universal love isn't quite there with SpongeBob. Maybe those overprotective parents that didn't let their kids watch SpongeBob were right after all. They would have been traumatized by what we're seeing here. This time, the photo appeared to be of a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was damaged in the same way as the boy, and she was naked, except for her underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her above another crude cut along her back. Are you guys seeing how easy it is to make something as shocking as graphic child murder feel completely boring? If the extent of the horror in this story is just repeating descriptions of dead kids, then it's not shocking anymore, it just feels tired and worn out. Again, the body was on the street and the photographer's shadow was visible, very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. A good example of using extreme violence in a more interesting way that kind of reminds me of this story is the movie Sinister. That movie famously uses old Super 8 style tapes that depict horrific things, and the story unravels as we see more and more of those violent scenes. It's kind of a similar vibe to this story, but there's a lot more intent and direction and story in Sinister, so it works a lot better in my opinion. Again, it's not a one-to-one comparison, and Sinister is not a perfect movie by any means, but I do think it's an interesting example of kind of taking this format and using it better in like an actual story context. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent. All sound cut out, like it did when the scene started. He put his tentacles down. That is never going to not be funny to me. It's accurate, but it just feels so out of place. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism like the others were at the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud. The most fear-inducing thing of all was that his sobbing was mixed with the screams. If this story says the most whatever thing of all one more time, I'm going to lose it. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing, this time with a still photo that lasted for a good 5 frames. Are we really about to get a third consecutive description of a dead kid? This story is reaching like Five Nights at Freddy's volume of dead children. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and backed up. This time, the photo was of a boy about the same age, but the scene was different. His entrails were being pulled out of his stomach wound by a large hand. The right eye popped and dangling, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. The next frame was different, but we couldn't tell how. He continued to the next image and it was the same thing. He then went back to the first and played them quicker and I lost it. Don't worry, narrator, you're not alone. I'm about to lose it myself. I vomited on the floor, the animation and sound editors gasping at the screen. The 5 frames were not 5 different photos, they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eye focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. I don't know how long our author thinks a frame is, but you're not going to be able to see all of that in just 5 frames. Most TV shows and movies are shot at 24 frames per second, which means 24 individual images per second of screen time. This means that 5 frames would be just over 1/5 of a second, which is incredibly quick, and this is assuming this video was shot in 24 frames per second and not at like 30 or 60. So you wouldn't really be able to discern all of this like obvious movement in that short amount of a time. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call on the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenburg arrived within about 15 minutes. This is another nitpick, but Steven Hillenburg actually left the show after the movie and was not involved with the production starting with the 4th season, so he wouldn't have been called in for this. He was confused as to why he had been called down, so the editor just continued the episode. Kind of hilarious that none of the people experiencing this thought to explain the situation to Steven Hillenburg. They just called him in to watch this horrifying tape. If I was essentially retired from the production of a show and someone tried to call me in without giving a reason as to why they needed my help, I would stay home. Squidward was just staring at the viewer, his face taking up the frame for about 3 seconds. Is this story doing what Sonic.exe did, where the descriptions are so specific because they're hoping that someone will create like a fan animation based on this episode? A lot of people were saying in the comments that the guy that wrote Sonic.exe made things very specific and gave the names of specific sounds and sprites because he just wanted a fan game to be made of it. And honestly, if you don't have the capacity or the ability to make a fan game, that's honestly kind of a clever way to get one made for you. It's just a shame the story wasn't better. And it kind of feels like that's what's going on here, but I'm not sure where the author would want someone to source the graphic pictures of dead children. You're kind of on your own with that one. The shot quickly panned out. That deep voice said, "Do it." And we saw a shotgun in Squidward's hands. Coward. You've committed to saying tentacles up until the point that things are supposed to get super creepy. Please, I beg of you and I demand of you, say that Squidward held the shotgun in his tentacles. It's only fair. Also, you can't really pan out from a shot. To pan is to move the camera horizontally along its vertical axis. You can zoom in or dolly out, but you can't pan out. Panning is like turning your head from side to side like I'm doing right now. You guys should count yourself lucky you just got a good view of my Majora's Mask moon-sized nose that I've got here. But anyway, that's just a little film terminology fact for you. The word pan gets used inaccurately to describe like literally every single camera movement all the time. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters the wall behind him in his bed, and he flies back with force. A throwback to my 6th grade humanities class, where my teacher had us like watch the actual footage of JFK being assassinated and taught us about like second shooter theories, and we like literally watched JFK be like graphically and violently killed. And I remember thinking that was awesome at the time, but looking back at it now, I'm like, that's kind of an insane thing to show in a 6th grade humanities class. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed, on its side, one eye dangling from what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. So there is our big reveal, the final explosive moment where Squidward finally ends it all. Somehow, I feel nothing. It's not even like funny bad, it's just not as shocking as it thinks it is. But maybe I'm just being a little too negative. Let's see what the very end of the story gives us. Mr. Hillenburg was obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point. so there were just a handful of us left to watch it again. Absolutely insane behavior to watch it all over again. You Nickelodeon editors are far more hardcore than I am. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it in my mind and cause me horrible nightmares. I'm sorry I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file had been edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. I actually wonder how many people work on an individual episode of SpongeBob. My thought is that it's probably not that many. You could probably just interrogate everybody who did. The CTO was called in to find out when it happened. Analysis of the file did show it was mixed with new material. However, the timestamp of the change was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware as well as glitches, such as if the timestamp was showing us the wrong time, but everything checked out fine. We didn't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified and no clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clues from the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before, but now that I've had something happen to me and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things. And that is the end of Squidward's suicide. I won't lie, I really didn't like this story. It was just honestly a lot worse than I remember it being. That's not a slight against the author or anything. I actually think this story is actually pretty competently put together, and there aren't really any glaring issues with the grammar or anything, which is definitely a rarity when it comes to a lot of these older creepypastas. They just played fast and loose with any sort of English or grammar rules back then. Also, I don't like to address specific comments typically, but I did have one person kind of go after me for saying that grammar is important in stories because they were like, Cormac McCarthy famously didn't use a lot of punctuation in his stories, which is definitely true, but Cormac McCarthy understood the rules of English grammar. Also, I love a lot of internet horror, but I'm very willing to say that I'm pretty sure there's a gap in quality between Blood Meridian and Sonic.exe. But anyways, I just found this story to be kind of a nothing story ultimately to me. The bulk of the story is pretty much the same description of the 3 dead kids, and like I said before, that just didn't work for me at all. If I were to rewrite this, I would honestly ditch the paranormal unexplained angle entirely. I think the story would be way better if it was just some psychotic animator that made this. Then you could have a story that sets up all these people that work at the studio, and the story could be a mystery as to who this serial killer might be. I think that could be kind of fun. Imagine it being a classic whodunit story, but instead of there being a dead body, there's this creepy tape and you're all locked in the studio trying to figure out who might have made this. But let me know what you guys think of the story in the comments. Is this one that scared you a bunch when you were younger? Do you think I'm just being too mean in general? I also think I might be being a little bit more harsh because I just read a bunch of Shirley Jackson short stories and she's incredibly subtle with her horror and I really like that, and I was kind of in that mode before I read Squidward's suicide. So again, if it feels like I'm being too critical, then I probably am. That's kind of the point of these videos. I don't look at all media the way that I look at media when I'm doing them for these videos, if that makes sense. I think somebody told me once that I sound like a very negative person and I don't like a lot of things. I actually really like pretty much everything I read. It's just when I'm looking at them with a more critical eye, I kind of feel the responsibility to point out some of these mistakes that I see or critique the horror in a way that I wouldn't usually think about if I'm just enjoying a piece of media on my own. But let's move on from this story to our next, which is Candle Cove. I have a lot of good memories about this story, and I seem to remember really liking it when I reread it a couple months ago for the channel. But I also wasn't really looking at it through a critical lens like I talked about earlier, so I'm curious to see if my thoughts about it change when I'm looking at it more carefully. If you didn't know, Candle Cove is a short online horror story written by Chris Straub, who would later go on to create the analog horror series Local 58. Local 58 is incredible, by the way. It's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, analog horror series on YouTube. And it's a pretty important piece of internet horror history, as it's credited as being one of the first major pieces of internet analog horror, if not the first. And I think that's really cool. I think that's just really refreshing to me because so many of these creepypastas feel like they're just recycling the same tropes and ideas to hop on a trend. But it's cool to see that somebody created something like this analog horror series that was very unique when it came out and still honestly feels like it's a little bit better or elevated beyond a lot of analog horror that comes out today. But this story, Candle Cove, is written like we are reading an old online discussion board talking about old TV shows. I personally really like this framing, and I think it's a great way to make any lost episode creepypasta more believable and interesting. It makes it all feel that much more real, at least it does to me. But enough talking about this story before I even started reading it. Let's get into the actual story of Candle Cove. Sorry if you heard my bird in the background there. She was screaming for me because she missed me, and then I went out there and she started hissing at me and getting angry at me. I love her dearly. Sky Shale 033. Subject: Candle Cove Local Kids Show. Does anyone remember this kids show? It was called Candle Cove and I must have been 6 or 7. I never found reference to it anywhere, so I think it was on a local station around 1971 or 1972. I lived in Ironton at the time. I don't remember which station, but I do remember it was on at a weird time, like 4 p.m. So already, we can see that the dialogue here sounds natural in a way that a lot of these old creepypastas fail to capture. It sounds just casual enough to be realistic. I also love the premise of trying to find the name of an old kid show that you probably just barely remember. I'm sure we all have shows like this from our childhoods. I remember watching a lot of Max and Ruby and Maggie and the Ferocious Beast a lot when I was super little, and Maggie in particular is like just barely this faint memory in the back of my mind. And I find it really fascinating to try to remember aspects of a TV show that I saw like literally over 20 years ago and sort through the tiny scraps of information my brain remembers. I will intentionally not go back and watch those old shows because I like to like have this weird faint image in my mind. I think that's kind of fun. If any of you have a show like this, then drop it in the comments below. I always think it's kind of fun to go down that rabbit hole of finding whatever old show somebody barely remembers. Like, do you remember the show American Dragon Jake Long? That's one of those shows I barely remember, but I remember thinking Jake Long was the coolest person on the planet. Mike Painter 65. Subject: Candle Cove local kids show. It seems really familiar to me. I grew up outside of Ashland. I was 9 years old in 72. Candle Cove. Was it about pirates? I remember a pirate marionette at the mouth of a cave talking to a little girl. One tiny critique here that I personally dislike in a story is when something that is supposed to be an online discussion contains phrasing that is more fitting for actual dialogue. Like the Candle Cove, was it about pirates? Makes it sound like the commenter is trying to remember something, but it feels a little out of place knowing that this is an internet forum. It just feels like any sort of pause to recollect something should have been done before the commenter wrote the comment, and we shouldn't be able to see that thought process. That's just a nitpick though. But also immediately hitting us with the fact that this was a puppet show just makes it that much more creepy. Puppets always kind of freaked me out when I was little and kind of do to this day. My younger brother and sister really loved the show Lazy Town, and that show always kind of creeped me out. I think it was like the mix of puppets and real people that unsettled me. But also, I really love the Muppets, so I'm not sure why Lazy Town freaked me out so much. We watched the Muppets Christmas Carol for Christmas last year and it was so good. And also, I'm a big fan of the YouTube channel Arlo, so maybe I am like not scared of puppets after all. Sky Shale 033. Yes, okay, I'm not crazy. I remember Pirate Percy. I was always kind of scared of him. He looked like he was built from parts of other dolls, really low budget. His head was an old porcelain baby doll, looked like an antique that didn't belong on the body. I don't remember what station this was. I don't think it was WTSF though. It might be stretching believability just a tiny bit to say that the pirate's head was an old porcelain baby doll, but I don't think most readers would really clue into that at this point. Either way, I think this story is pretty good about being subtle in its horror. Things feel like they might be slightly off, but nothing that crazy has happened yet to throw the reader off. Jaren 2005. Sorry to resurrect this old thread, but I know exactly what show you mean, Sky Shale. I think Candle Cove ran for only a couple of months in 71, not 72. I was 12 and I watched it a few times with my brother. It was channel 58, whatever that station was. My mom would let me switch to it after the news. Let me see what I remember. Awesome shout out to Local 58 here, even though I'm pretty sure this was before that series existed. I wonder if the author had that idea in his head already or if this was just a coincidence. I really love when people hide Easter eggs to their future projects in their work. Pixar famously does this in all their movies, and Mike Flanagan did it with Midnight Mass, which is just so cool to me. It took place in Candle Cove, and it was about a little girl who imagined herself to be friends with pirates. The pirate ship was called the Laughingstock. And Pirate Percy wasn't a very good pirate because he got scared too easily. And there was Calliope music constantly playing. Don't remember the girl's name, Janice or Jade or something. I think it was Janice. I really love the name Laughingstock for the pirate ship. It feels very believable to me for some reason. I could totally see this being like a weird passion project that aired on public access TV back in the day. Skyshell 033. Thank you, Jaren. Memories flooded back when you mentioned the Laughingstock in Channel 58. I remember the bow of the ship was a wooden smiling face with the lower jaw submerged. It looked like it was swallowing the sea, and it had that awful Ed Wynn voice and laugh. I especially remember how jarring it was when they switched from the wooden/plastic model to the foam puppet version of the head that talked. Mike Painter 65. Huh, I remember it too. Do you remember this part, Sky Shale? You have to go inside. I really like the friendly banter between these three internet strangers. Something about this just feels very cozy to me, which might seem out of place in a horror story. But I firmly believe that a horror story should make you care about its characters and give you a sense of comfort and warmth before taking it all away when things start to get spooky. I remember reading The Exorcist and just thinking for the first like 50 pages that Reagan's relationship with her mom was super sweet, and I just wanted everything to stay the way it was. And then I remembered I was reading The Exorcist and buckled up for an absolutely soul-crushing experience. experience. Now, obviously, the characters in Candle Cove are hardly fleshed out even a little bit, but I think the dynamic between these three internet strangers helps set up that cozy vibe. SkyShallow33. Ugh, Mike, I gotta chill reading that. Yes, I remember. That's what the ship always told Percy when there was a spooky place he had to go in, like a cave or a dark room where the treasure was. And the camera would push in on Laughingstock's face with each pause. You have to go inside. With his two eyes askew and that flopping foam jaw and the fishing line that opened it and closed it. Ugh. It just looked so cheap and awful. You guys remember the villain? He had a face that was just a handlebar mustache above really tall, narrow teeth. Kevin Hart. I honestly thought the villain was Pirate Percy. I was about 5 when the show was on. Nightmare fuel. Thanks for chiming in, Kevin Hart. Nice to see you here on the Lost Media Forum. Jaren 2005. That wasn't the villain, the puppet with the mustache. That was the villain's sidekick, Horace Horrible. He had a monocle too, but it was on top of the mustache. I used to think it meant he only had one eye. But yeah, the villain was another marionette, the Skin Taker. I can't believe what they let us watch back then. This is probably my biggest gripe with the story. I dislike how the villain is named the Skin Taker because it sounds too obviously sinister to me and kills some of the subtlety of the story. But honestly, reading this after Squidward's suicide is such a breath of fresh air that it makes Skin Taker seem incredibly subtle compared to graphic depictions of child death that we got in that story. Kevin Hart. Geez, the Skin Taker. What kind of a kid's show were we watching? I could seriously not look at the screen when the Skin Taker showed up. He just descended out of nowhere on his strings, just a dirty skeleton watching that brown top hat and cape, and his glass eyes that were too big for his skull. SkyShallow33. Wasn't his top hat and cloak all sewn up crazily? Was that supposed to be children's skin? Mike Painter 65. Yeah, I think so. Remember his mouth didn't open and close, his jaw just slid back and forth. I remember the little girl said, "Why does your mouth move like that?" And the Skin Taker didn't look at the girl but at the camera and said, "To grind your skin." Honestly, this is kind of hilarious. This just reads like something you would see in an episode of Smiling Friends. SkyShallow33. I'm so relieved that other people remember this terrible show. I used to have this awful memory, a bad dream I had where the opening jingle ended, the show faded in from black, and all the characters were there, but the camera was just cutting to each of their faces, and they were just screaming, and the puppets and marionettes were flailing spastically, and just all screaming. The girl was just moaning and crying like she had been through hours of this. I woke up many times from that nightmare. I used to wet the bed when I had it. Okay, I feel like I have to take this opportunity to talk about my terrifying childhood reoccurring dream that I used to get all the time when I was little. I used to sleep on the top bunk of a bed in my room that I shared with 2 of my brothers, and I would have this dream that one of them would like call out to me. And at the end of the hall, we had a bonus room where our TV was, and in my dreams, my brother would almost always tell me to like check out a new character he unlocked in Super Smash Bros. If you couldn't tell, I was a very video game obsessed child, and I'm arguably a very video game obsessed adult. But anyways, in my dream, I would walk down the hall and open the door to the bonus room, and a spindly skeletal lady would appear and like pick me up and bring me back to my room. It's hard to describe, but it's like I would see her and she would jump at me, and then I would feel myself falling backward and us like flying back until I was back on my bed. And then I'd be under my blanket and this spindly lady would be there with me, and she would just stare at me and smile until I woke up. It was awful, and I had that dream like once a week when I was little. Sorry, I've just been looking for an opportunity to dump some of my childhood trauma on you guys, and it felt like it fit in nicely with the story. Stick around to the end of the video where I'll talk about one of my funniest and strangest dreams to balance out the weird horror of that recurring nightmare. Kevin Hart. I don't think that was a dream. I remember that. I remember that it was an episode. SkyShallow33. No, not possible. There was no plot or anything. I mean, literally just standing in place, crying and screaming for the whole show. Kevin Hart. Maybe I'm manufacturing the memory because you said that, but I swear I remember seeing what you described. They just screamed. Jaren 2005. Yes, the little girl Janice. I remember seeing her shake, and the Skin Taker screaming through his gnashing teeth, his jaw careening so wildly I thought it would come off its wire hinges. I turned it off, and it was the last time I watched. I ran to tell my brother, and we didn't have the courage to turn it back on. Mike Painter 65. I visited my mom today at the nursing home. I asked her about when I was little in the early 70s, when I was 8 or 9, and if she remembered a show called Candle Cove. She said she was surprised that I could remember that, and I asked why, and she said, because I used to think it was so strange that you said, "I'm going to watch Candle Cove now, Mom," and then you would tune the TV to static and just watch dead air for 30 minutes. You had a big imagination with your little pirate show. End of story. I really like this reveal. I think it's ambiguous and creepy enough to leave the reader with more questions than answers in a way that doesn't feel frustrating. I also love that the story establishes that this was a show that was watched by a number of different people, so it couldn't possibly just be in this one person's imagination. The idea that all of these kids would just stare at static on the screen and be watching this creepy puppet show that only they can see is unique and really eerie to me. I think it's a really interesting way to do a paranormal lost episode story that makes the lost episode feel even more cursed in the best way possible. Candle Cove isn't a perfect story, but I really like it, and it's on the internet for free, and it's a super short read, so I think it exceeds pretty much all the expectations that I would have for it. But now I want to look at how these two lost episode creepypastas compare when stacked up next to each other directly. And you already know that I like Candle Cove more than Squidward's Suicide, but let's look at the building blocks of each story and how they differ from each other. Let's start with the setup. In Squidward's Suicide, we are told that the narrator is an intern for Nickelodeon, and we're given a bit of a history lesson when it comes to SpongeBob. I don't think this is a bad setup at all, actually. I think that establishing the narrator as an insider is a smart move, but I do wonder what the story would have looked like if this was an episode that actually aired. Like, imagine that it was similar to Candle Cove, where we had some people describing a lost episode of SpongeBob that scarred them for life, but I do think that the original setup is totally fine. Candle Cove has a lot less explicit setup, but I appreciate that the formatting of the story gives us everything that we need to understand what exactly is going on. Presenting it as an online forum lets us excuse the lack of character development and some of the mistakes in the writing, because all of it was written by strangers online. It's definitely two different approaches to storytelling, and I don't think one is better than the other. It's pretty much just down to personal preference at the end of the day. Next, let's take a look at the actual spooky media itself. In Squidward's Suicide, most of the horror comes from the hidden pictures of the dead kids. There is some stuff beforehand about Squidward getting booed at his clarinet concert, but none of that stuff is really that scary to me, but I do want to talk about the hyper-realistic eyes. I do find it interesting that both stories involve aspects of character design that feel uncanny or out of place. In one story we have the hyper-realistic eyes and blood, and in the other we have the skin taker with its hat made of children's skin and Percy the Pirate with his weird porcelain baby doll face. These are very similar ideas. I'm not particularly creeped out by the descriptions in either story, but I feel that the way that the creepy puppets are described in Candle Cove helps me picture the story a lot better, as opposed to the few times that Squidward's Suicide uses the same descriptor of hyper-realistic, which doesn't really paint any sort of vivid image in my mind. Describing things is honestly really difficult when it comes to writing a story. I think I'm honestly pretty bad at conveying visual information through text. So I totally understand the desire to find a single term that can describe the look that you're going for, but I feel like more could have been done in the story to make it feel a little bit more terrifying or give us a little bit better of an image about what exactly is going on. Maybe if the narrator had better described the specific ways that the images made them feel rather than just describing themselves as being scared or disturbed, then it would feel more frightening. And I think that's something that Candle Cove does well. The characters are pretty good at describing why the show freaked them out, and it helps the reader understand the horror a bit better. Next, I want to talk about the moments that highlight the explicit horror of the lost media. In Candle Cove, we have the episode of all the characters screaming. I actually really don't know how I feel about this. I kind of wish there was more to this, or that it was described in greater detail, especially given the presence of an actual child actor. I feel like better describing the situation that the child actor was in would make the scene a lot more upsetting. Like if all the puppets were like clearly screaming at her or something. And we get a little bit of that, but again, I feel like it would have been better if we saw more of like the way that she felt, or like the fact that it was obviously this production was almost like sinister or doing something bad to her in particular. I think it's fine as is, but I almost wonder if this particular episode would have been more effective if it was more like explicitly disturbing or even just like removed entirely. It's just a thought though. In Squidward's Suicide, we have the photos of the dead kids, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I feel like explicitly describing these images 3 times in a row just feels tedious and kind of distasteful. I'm not opposed to there being like a single freaky image of a dead kid, but I don't think that all 3 images need to be described in great detail when the story is pretty short as is. It just feels strange that the story is supposed to be about an episode of SpongeBob, but so much of the time is spent describing images that aren't related to the show. I think if you're going to commit to making a story about a scary SpongeBob episode, then do more with the actual characters and settings of the SpongeBob universe. To be clear, I don't think you could actually make something that's scary in this universe, but it would be more respectable than just throwing in gore because you couldn't think of anything better. Lastly, we have the reveals at the end of each of the stories. In Squidward's Suicide, we have the reveal that this episode seems to have been created by paranormal means. The video files had been suddenly edited in a way that would have been completely impossible for any human to do in such a quick amount of time. So we end up learning that this actually is a paranormal story after all. By the way, if the ghostly Squidward entity is looking for work, I'd love to have you edit my videos. If it only took me 20 seconds to edit these, my life would be a lot easier. But anyways, in Candle Cove, Cove, we get the reveal that the kids who watch the show appear to be only watching static on their TVs for 30 minutes. And for how much more I like Candle Cove as compared to Squidward's suicide, I actually don't know if the content of each reveal is that much better in either of these. I think the reveal works better in Candle Cove because it happens a lot sooner. The reader is fully invested in the story before learning the context behind this creepy show. It almost feels like an abrupt conclusion, but the story is so good up to that point that it provokes so much thought in the reader about what might be actually going on here. I just read a book that I really enjoyed called Incidents Around the House, and I won't spoil anything because I'm going to make a video about it that'll probably be the next video that gets uploaded on this channel. But the ending was also a little abrupt in the way that Candle Cove is, where my mind immediately went searching for answers as to what might be actually going on in the story. But I don't get that same feeling from Squidward's suicide. I think the paranormal catch-all the story employs explains things well enough, but doesn't leave the reader asking for more. In fact, I almost think the story shoots itself in the foot by saying that the creepy images weren't found to be connected to any known murders or investigations. I think if it was revealed that they found out that they were pictures from a series of murders that resembled what they assumed to be like an isolated child murder, it could have been really interesting. Like, imagine the police are already aware of one of the photos, but then through this creepy tape we learn that there's like, oh, there's more out there. There's this like freaky child murderer out there who's doing more of these crimes. I think that could be kind of cool. I'm not saying that version of the story would be perfect, but Squidward's suicide left me wanting more in a way that wasn't very satisfying. Overall, I was shocked at how much I disliked Squidward's suicide and pleasantly surprised at how well Candle Cove holds up to this day. I don't think Candle Cove is perfect, but it's so short that I can forgive it for some of its flaws. Squidward's suicide is just a little bit longer than I would have liked it to be. But I am not the ultimate authority on creepypasta quality. I am a firm believer that all horror is subjective, and if you like something that someone else says is bad, that's totally okay. I eat at McDonald's an embarrassing amount of times every week. I'm actually going there right after I record this video, and I know that the food is straight garbage, but I love it for some reason. What I mean to say is that it's okay to like a story that's maybe not the highest quality, and it's also okay to dislike a story that is well regarded. I have personally experienced both of those things. So overall, I hope that you learned something about how to write and how not to write a horror story. I hope that you agreed with some of my criticisms and strongly disagreed with others. Please let me know what creepypasta I should cover next. Let me know if you like this kind of comparative analysis style of videos. It's my first time making something like this. Also, please go watch my video on We Used to Live Here if you haven't yet. It's like an hour-long video where I break down the story of a cool horror novel and explain the ending. I really love making those like literature focused videos, but they typically don't perform as well as these internet horror ones, so I'm trying to get those videos some more love. Also, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subs by the end of 2025. And again, go check out my new Let's Play channel that I will have linked in the description here. Zach and I will probably be posting like at least 3 episodes a week there, and it would mean a lot to both of us if you guys subscribe there as well. If you want to support me further, then consider becoming a channel member, where for just $3 a month, you'll get access to my Discord, members only videos, early access to all my videos, and access to my members only book club. You'll also get your name in the credits like you're seeing on the screen right now. A massive thank you to all my gold tier members: Amanda Mapes, Lucas Fernando, Chris Lamb, Ezra, Silent Trails, Blue Radio Media, Tyler the Leper, Vix Corner, Miss Joy 16, Coco Boko, Cherry Shark, Moonsun Blog, Starlight Pink, Jack Samore, Amanda Castillon, Lexi, Arcade Link Author, Pyrocat B, The Official Gar, Wabab Flow High, Zapodapos, Semra, Laura Gonzalez, Floropause, Rafael Sampiao, Classic Pats Games Plus, Miranda M, Lemonade Slug, Hugh Brian, Ben Best, Marin Elizabeth, and Exonym, Sumstar, Digital Fox 615, Issa, Yuthon, Sherbert, Amelia Nomura, Temple, Ellie, Jupiter Rainstorms, Gambit, Junie, Leah, Maddie, Ellis Hale, Silent Trails, DG Plasm, and Vesper. Thank you guys all so much for continuing to support me. There's a members only book review video that I made for you guys just a couple days ago, so please go check that out. But now it's time for more Davis Morgan lore. This time I'll be discussing that weird dream that I had back when I was in high school, and that I think about like all the time. I remember that in my dream, I was in a mall parking lot with Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, and we were going to participate in a wizard battle like they do in Sword in the Stone. If you haven't seen that movie or don't remember, a wizard battle is where 2 wizards transform into like different animals and other things to fight one another. It's a pretty cool idea, honestly. But I remember battling Maleficent and her turning into a dragon like she does in Sleeping Beauty, and I looked at her and said, "You want a dragon? I'll show you a dragon." And then before I could do anything else, my view shifted to Hades from Hercules, standing in the parking lot. And this is exactly what he said. I know this is what he said because I wrote it down in my phone immediately after I had the dream. He said, "Oh yeah? Well, I've been dealing with a dragon my entire life. being womanized all the time. I have no idea why my mind thought of that. I remember laughing in my dream and then immediately waking up. That was the last thing I ever saw in that dream. It's still one of the wildest dreams I've ever had. But let me know if you guys have had any bizarre and funny dreams. That is the one that has just always stuck out to me the most, and it still makes me laugh to this day. But thank you guys again for watching this video and just supporting the channel in general. It's crazy that I'm at over 50,000 subs now. I didn't think it would happen this quick, and I'm super grateful for each and every one of you guys. But that's going to do it for this video, so I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.